So please help me welcome Dr. Ellen Jefferson, who will start off her sessions today by talking about saving the bottom 50%. Dr. Jefferson.
Thank you. I figured I'd start with a little bit more detail about my history and why I got involved in Austin Pets Alive. And when I first graduated from vet school in '97 and moved to Austin in '98, I was working at an emergency hospital. And before I moved to Austin, I worked in rural Rocky Mount, Virginia, at a mixed practice. And so I got a lot of bare bones experience working with very few resources, and then moved to Austin, worked at an emergency clinic, and was doing volunteer work at the shelters in and around Austin during the day. And I started Emancipet Spay and Neuter Clinic because I wanted to see fewer animals end up in the shelter. That was back when our city was euthanizing about 85% of the 25,000 animals that came in the door. So I didn't really feel like my skills as a volunteer vet were really put to good use, and so I started the Spay-Neuter Clinic in an effort to try to stem the flow of animals into the shelter so that we'd have fewer to deal with and fewer would get euthanized. And after about 9 years of doing low-cost and free spay-neuter, we were still at a 50% euthanasia rate that had been static for 8 years. So we saw an initial improvement, and I don't know that it was all related to us, but it didn't improve. And so I started thinking more about how are we going to make Austin a no-kill city, how are we going to prevent them from being euthanized, and started examining the gaps. And that's kind of what happened with Austin Pets Alive and why I got involved with Austin Pets Alive. They were already established, but they weren't doing any kind of rescue or animal care. They were just an advocacy organization, and we're back in 2000, we're trying to make Austin a no-kill city by the millennium, and then that didn't work, obviously. And so in 2008, we sort of revitalized that mission to try to make Austin have a 90% or better save rate at the city shelter. So the first definition that we need to go over is just what is the bottom 50%. And that is the portion of animals that were being euthanized at our shelter, and I think probably at a lot of shelters, 50% is kind of a place that shelters get to and seem to kind of get stuck. And that 50%, what we were told and what the data seemed to show is that these animals were not wanted. They weren't very specific reasons because the documentation wasn't that great, but it included healthy animals as well as injured and ill. And what we found over time is that we could break out the bottom 50%, and I wish there was a way to turn this pyramid upside down because the 50% that's saved should be at the top, and then the bottom 50% that's not saved. And we found that 10 to 15% are healthy, desirable dogs and cats, and 10 to 15% are desirable dogs and cats with just minor issues. That could be like a little bit of mange or kennel cough or something that's pretty easy to fix. And then underage kittens and puppies make up about 5% of our population, and critically ill and injured 5%, and then 10% are the chronic, severe medical and behavioral problems that are going to take a lifetime of work for that animal to be saved. And so we started trying to examine why is this happening? Why are these 50% being euthanized? And just from the outside, it appears to be a lack of adopters. We know only 20 to 30% of animals come from shelters and rescue groups, so the rest come from some other resource. It seems like it's a lack of resources. The shelters don't have the resources to care for the animals, to get them out. A lack of space. If you're going to try to save them all, where do you put them if you have a quick turnover shelter? And all of that leads to a feeling of helplessness, which I certainly had. That's why I went and started a spay-neuter clinic, because I didn't feel like I could help them. And then, this is a controversial subject, but I think that because euthanasia is the default choice when a shelter is full, we don't take it in this, I hope I don't offend anybody with this, but I don't feel like we take it as seriously as it is. It's a life and death issue, and I think that if euthanasia was not as easy as it is, and again, I don't mean any disrespect with that, I've certainly been involved in euthanizing healthy animals, I think that maybe we would be more creative in trying to figure out how to get them out. And it's also the cheapest route, which from a budget point of view is a huge deal. and that makes it the default. So why is not saving them a problem? Why should we address this? One, it's bad publicity. What we found in Austin is that the citizens overwhelmingly wanted to save the animals, and they didn't care about all the internal politics, all of the reasons why. They just wanted the animals saved. It leads to poor morale. Volunteers and shelter employees, they don't want to have to euthanize these animals either. And then also, I think that animals, every living being, their strongest instinct is to survive. And I think that's a good reason to try to save them. And companion animals are becoming more and more valuable. So the change in focus of working with inputs, which is spay-neuter, we were measuring inputs as if that was our performance measure to try to make the city euthanize fewer animals. And the inputs were spay and neuter, rabies vaccine clinics, wellness clinics, microchipping, all of these things that lead to a better community and a better lifestyle for animals, but don't actually target the endpoint that we were looking for, which was to euthanize fewer animals. And the city wanted to do that, but we weren't measuring what would actually get us to the end. And spaying and neutering, obviously, it has a huge effect. Austin has spayed and neutered over 150,000 animals at least, and we're seeing that there are fewer and fewer stray dogs out in our population, fewer and fewer stray cats, and I think that's probably related. But it's hard, again, pretty hard to measure. And it doesn't help the ones that are already at the shelter. So having that focus is good, but it has to be paired with how do you get the animals out also. And this is why we know we can save them. This is just a quick slide on people are becoming more aware of shelter animals and the reasons to adopt and to save them, to save a life. And that means there's more opportunities for us to encroach on that 70% that are not adopting from shelters and rescue groups. The thing that we found politically, which was really interesting, is that the politicians love this issue and will help raise money for cities because it crosses every political barrier out there. And so they can appeal to the animal groups and reach everybody. And so that was a real eye-opener for me because that was a way for us to go to the city and ask for more funding to try to save more animals. And I don't believe that in the U.S. that there's probably any community that doesn't want to see this happen. We started looking at statistics. Again, how do we know we're going to be able to save them? And the AVMA does a study for new veterinarians in their demographics book. I think it's called the handbook, Demographics Handbook, and they talk about how many people are in a community based on state that have a pet under the age of 1 year. So that means they would have gotten them within that last 12 months. So that means that that's a new home that doesn't turn over. That's a number of new homes that are available every year, and so 75,000 people have a pet less than 1 year of age. How do we get our pets into those homes? And if only 25% come from shelter and rescue, again, we've got a huge opportunity to just compete with these other sources, marketing, making people more aware, trying to get them into our shelter. And people are spending more and more on pets, which means they're more and more valuable. So how do we save them? Getting creative, if you it's just an exercise to think about what would you do if you couldn't euthanize? How would you save them if you couldn't euthanize? It doesn't mean you don't, but how, if you start thinking along those lines, what would you do differently? And veterinarians, I think one reason that we've been successful is because I'm a veterinarian, and I think we're trained to problem solve. We're trained to deal with the weird, random stuff that comes up and create a solution and make that animal better. You can apply that same logic to a whole city. If there's, and you'll kind of see the way that I work through our problem solving, but I think it applies directly to how we're trained to deal with disease. So step one is moving people to act. We've got to get the marketing out there, get them into our shelter, increase adopters and fosters, build up support in the community. This is not something that can be done by your paid staff only. There's just no way. And we need to embrace those people. The other, one thing that animal people are not really good at is being nice to people that want to help. And I think that we have, if we want them to help, we have to be nice to them. We have to show them how much their contribution means and how much, even if it's annoying, how much they're helping, that keep them engaged, because every action leads to a group of actions. People are the solutions, increasing shelter resources for care, We have to increase shelter space and capacity. That's done through foster homes and creative use of space, increasing the difficulty of euthanasia, making protocols so that there's hoops that have to be jumped through, makes people have to think a little bit outside the box, and increasing the motivation and commitment to save. And that is applied directly to shelter staff in the sense that if our shelter, we did surgeries 3 or 4 days a week, spay and neuter surgery. So if an animal was adopted on a Friday, it might not get surgery until Tuesday, but it can't leave the shelter until it's spayed and neutered, so it sits in that cage for those 4 days. That's another animal that could have come in and done its stray hold during that 4 days and if that animal had been able to leave immediately. So increasing the turnover and being more efficient with how we get the animals out the door is a big part of increasing the capacity. So if you try to break this down into actions, every single person that comes into a shelter is bringing an animal. It might be an animal control officer, it might be a person who finds a stray, it might be an owner, but it's all actions by people that get these animals into the shelter. So if you start thinking that backwards, all we need is the same number of actions for people to get them out of the shelter. And so it really is building this massive component of people who can take one action to get an animal out of the shelter. It's overwhelming. We were euthanizing 14,000 animals in 2007, and that's a huge, huge number. And I think that the key is to break it down into digestible chunks of animals, problems, groups, whatever it is, so that you can get people to devote themselves to one task that's attainable. And then that makes everything else, if you can get multiple people or groups working on one task each, then that all coalesces up to saving a whole bunch. And we always like to say that everybody can do one thing to save an animal. There's not one person in our community that can't do something to save an animal. And think we had no resources when we started. We had no volunteers. We had no fosters. We had no building. We had nothing. And so we had a philosophy of that every single person can become an expert. So if you have a foster who fosters a litter of bottle babies and they do it well, then they're your expert. They do one litter, then they become the mentor for the next group, and they train people. So it's not all on the veterinarian's back or the executive director's back to try to make sure that everybody's doing it perfectly. When you're in a crisis situation or an emergency situation, which I know we never think of city euthanasia like that, but I don't know why we don't, because I think that we'd be motivated and capable of doing a lot more if we were thinking along those terms of who would you empower to help if this was an emergency, like a hurricane or a fire or anything like that. We've been through a fire in Austin, which was horrible, and everybody was an expert. I mean, we were out in the fire helping to save animals, and we're not trained in the fire or police or rescue or anything. And so I think that we've got to be a little bit more lenient about who can help and empowering them to do it. Creating a huge life-saving program, compartmentalizing the work, we've already talked about that, trusting people. And one of my friends has a saying that I think is really good. Perfect is the enemy of life-saving, because we're never going to be perfect at this. And if we were, we would have already had it solved. And so this is something that is a work in progress. We're building the bike as we're riding it. Nothing is going to be perfect before we start saving the first animal or the first group of animals, but we have to try. So how do we get people to actually step up and act? There's an organization out there that does motivational speaking and talks about how you get social movements going. And this is a social movement because you need the entire community to help. It's not something that's just going to be a group of people at your shelter doing it. And the first piece is that the right people at the right time are there. And I actually don't think that that's that important, because I think that there's a ton of right people, and it is the right time. And every city probably has the right moment to get started. One thing that doesn't work is when you keep just throwing information out at people with no action plan. That doesn't help them. It actually decreases their ability to act. Hope is the most important piece. So giving people the hope that we can actually solve this, maybe, again, breaking it down to a small group of animals that we can save, giving people the hope that we can get a piece solved, and then we'll move on to the next piece, and then we'll move on to the next piece. And as long as there's hope for something attainable, you'll have people supporting you in droves. And where there's life, there's hope. I love that saying. Okay, so this is the last slide for moving people from this motivational group. But people need to know, believe, and care enough to want to act. They need to have the will and instructions to act, and once they act, they have to be rewarded for doing so. And I think that the reward is in saving the lives, and as long as you keep pushing that message out, you don't have to get people expensive presents or actual awards. But I think that congratulating them on saving a life, congratulating them on the hard work they've done, even if it's not perfect, but just constantly reinforcing how important their action is to the whole mission. People keep coming back to help. Okay, so what did we do? We decided we wanted to make Austin a no-kill city, and we put it out there. So these are things that we put out there to the world, and Austin had already failed, so keep that in mind. Austin Pets Alive had already failed. So by putting this back out there, we were kind of like, well, nobody's going to believe us, nobody's going to help us. But we felt like it was important to have a big goal with the end being something that people really want to see, and not just a better community or better welfare. We wanted something very tangible, a no-kill city, 90% plus being saved. And who are we, Austin Pets Alive? Why are we here? 14,000 animals died in 2007, and we couldn't see any change without something drastic happening. And so we decide, how are we going to save those 14,000 animals? Obviously, they're already dead, so we can't save them. So how do we actually save them? The way that we started was by being very focused on only the animals that are going to be euthanized. So that was kind of a struggle. How do we even know which ones are going to be euthanized? But almost every shelter has a list that they prepare generally before closing, and then the next morning the animals are euthanized before the shelter opens. So we were able to get that list and start promoting those animals immediately out. And so we had 1 hour to make decisions. We were out there Facebooking, Craigslisting, sending out notes to our email groups of volunteers, and whichever ones we felt like we could find a foster for, again, we had no building, so we had nowhere to take them, then we would put a hold on them and come get them the next day, have the foster come get them the next day. And that worked out to be a pretty good relationship with the city because they were willing to extend the hold for 24 hours if we felt like we could get them out. Of course, we couldn't abuse that and just hold everybody and then only come pick up 1 or 2. But we had people who were really good at choosing the animals that they thought were most desirable, and then also getting that urgent plea out. We definitely wanted to produce measurable results. Having a no-kill city there's an end goal. It's a numerical end goal. So we needed to be able to show how we were contributing to that numerical end goal. And so every animal that we saved from the actual euthanasia list was a number that contributed to the percent of animals being saved. And so we were able to see exactly how much impact we were making, which was a huge motivator for our volunteers and our fosters. And then, of course, never relenting. I mean, you want to quit almost every day, but you have to keep going. Okay, so we have 6 what I think are key ingredients for Austin Pets Alive's success. And one is leadership. There has to be somebody who's responsible and knowledgeable. And I think that veterinarians, again, that's a role that veterinarians could step into. I don't have any special gifts to be the leader of Austin Pets Alive. And I don't even have any business training. I'm not the best leader. But somebody had to step up that knew what they were talking about related to animal care and animal welfare. And so without somebody else doing it, that was me. But I think that there's plenty of veterinarians out there that could do the same. We needed a specific attainable goal. We've already talked about that, 90%. We needed a rally cry. And if you look at rally cries that are successful, they're very motivating. And even though it feels negative to talk about the number of animals being euthanized, you can't not talk about it and still expect people to act. And so what we tried to do is make it positive. We can do better than this. Austinites, everybody in Austin wants to do better. The shelter wants to do better. The city wants to do better. Everybody wants to do better. So join us so that we can do better. Team Spirit, I love this picture because these girls just sent us a photo of them in their T-shirts because they were excited to have their new T-shirts. And that is exciting because it's clear that the mission is inspiring people to be part of it. And so it's kind of like creating something fun for people to join and saving animals. It can't be more fun than that. Support structure, not all people are strong when the going gets tough, so you have to have people who've been through it. Again, it's the learn one, do one, teach one philosophy, and that veterinarians are so good at. We need to empower people to have that same model for every aspect that's not veterinarian related, because everybody needs to feel like it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to keep trying and to get back in the saddle. Nobody's going to judge you. Just keep trying to go towards the end goal. Specific instructions are really important too. You can't just say, let's go save a bunch of animals. It has to be, we need you to transport this animal from the shelter over to the vet clinic to get spayed and neutered. We need you to pick up this animal and foster it for 2 weeks. We need you to go to the adoption site on Saturday and drop your animal off. People need very specific instructions, and then if they have that, there's no risk to them, so they're more likely to act and to actually help. These are messages that we've already talked about, that this is a crisis, you're needed immediately. We can all act now to help. Talking about the facts and figures is important because there's a lot of worry about not enough homes, and we found that was not true in Austin. And then, we pretty much already talked about these. Measurable results is important to promote the results too, because again, people need to see that you're actually making progress. So messages that don't work when it's already too late. When the animal's dead, don't put that out there. People don't want to see it. It makes them not want to help, and they don't want to even look at your Facebook page again if we're the radical group saying, look at all these animals that this community didn't save yesterday. That doesn't help anybody. When people feel like their action doesn't add up to a whole, you need to keep reminding everybody that your one action combined with 100 other people's actions actually has a huge impact. If it's just one person that feels like they're doing all the work, then they're not going to keep going. Doing the work, again, appreciating volunteers and fosters. You can have the best ones out there, and they'll love their foster so much, and they have 5 million questions about it, and it drives you crazy, and you just want them to relinquish the animal and get out of your life. But you need them. You really need them. You need to coddle them. You need to send them to somebody else who knows a little bit more about it, or send them to a website, or something that doesn't require you to suck up all your time. But we do need those people. And then no real solution. If you just send out photos like this and tell people to go rescue this dog, if you don't have the organization behind them to give the medical resources to allow them to positively impact this animal, it's overwhelming. There's not very many people who are going to go just save this dog by themselves with no support from any other group. So the strategy, again, we had clear rescue criteria. We had no duplication of effort. All of our effort was spent on helping the animals that were definitely going to die. So we were not duplicating the effort of the shelter, of the Humane Society, of rescue groups, of the adopters that were coming into the shelter. Everybody else got first pick. And again, we're strategically doing that because we wanted to see who was left and what gaps were in the community so that we could save them. We couldn't save them all immediately, like I said, so we had to create a structure of how we're going to save the easy ones first. And when you think about the pyramid, you've got that 10 to 15% that are healthy. All they need is more time to be seen by the public, or better marketing, or some avenue to get out of the shelter. And so those are the ones we started with, and then we started working our way up the pyramid. So once you save them, where do they go? If you don't have a building and the shelter's full, where do these animals go? And foster homes was our answer. We were able to create a massive foster group, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Adoption centers, PetSmarts, and some Petcos allow you to house cats permanently, so that can be a home for these animals. So we would put cats, our shelter had a big upper respiratory infection problem, so they would all have to go to foster first, but then after 2 weeks, we would have the foster surrender them and bring them to PetSmart or Petco. So we filled up all the PetSmarts and Petcos that we could find and developed a volunteer group to do the adoptions. And so that's capacity. Unused cages, a lot of shelters have unused cages. That's unused capacity. Creating more cages in creative spaces, using cages more efficiently, that goes back to getting them out faster. Once they've got a live outcome, get them out. They need to get out quickly so that you can save another life. And then creating wards. For some of the problems that we'll go over, we had to create separate spaces for these animals, and most of them were in foster homes to begin with, but now that we're big enough to have our own building, we do have wards that deal with these specific problems when there's no foster. So there's urgency. It doesn't matter where the cage is. We call our foster homes cages. They have every foster is allowed to have 2 cages, and that's it. And the idea behind that is that we don't want them to get 10 cages. Everybody wants to come save them. We want them to work really hard to get the ones they have out the door, and then they can save more. So if every little piece has the same urgency to turn that cage over, then you have this massive motion of turning over animals and getting them out quickly. And so everybody, we call it kind of a game of hot potato, because we just want them, we're kind of rushing them to the next stage and then rushing them to adoption. And then as soon as that one's adopted, rushing over to the shelter to save another one, and then starting the whole process again. And if you can tie the end goal with the save, again, you motivate people. You motivate people to act faster and to do harder work, because they can see who gets saved immediately from the action that just happened over here. So what we found by looking at the euthanasia list, we had no idea going in. This was just a concept. Let's save the animals on the euthanasia list. How bad can it be? And what we found is that there's specific groups of animals that need help, and then there's specific groups of problems. And there's obviously a connection between those. And we found over time that we needed a massive foster program. We needed a very large medical program, a large adoption program, and then programs that didn't exist in our city needed to be created. Again, compartmentalize the work, trust people, and don't be perfect. So foster homes, we've doubled the capacity of our shelter by having foster homes. We have about 700 to 1,000 animals in foster at any one time. And it was only in the last 6 months that we had paid foster coordinators. So fostering is something people love. And we have foster teams of 12 people that coordinate all of these hundreds of foster homes. And they do it all for free. They do it from home. They screen all the fosters. They do applications. They push people to come in for their vaccines. They push people to come in for adoption. They coordinate foster adoptions. They do this massive amount of work, and it's all for free. And that's a way that you can save money in your budget by just creating the place for people to help. So these people, they came out of the woodwork. We didn't go specifically recruit people to do this. We said, this is what we're going to do. Here's the areas we need help with, and they came out of the woodwork and did it. And the same thing, I'm working in San Antonio now too, and the same thing happened in San Antonio. The foster program is our strongest volunteer program, and you can get a lot of people to help with it. You just have to get a good person at the head of it, which happened just happened for us, so I think it's pretty possible anywhere. The foster program challenges, it's all volunteer structure, maintaining the program and managing the growth. I'll show you some slides on our growth in foster. And the program, as it gets bigger, becomes harder. And we have a lot of turnover of foster people, foster parents, and also volunteers. And that's just part of the deal. And I'll show you a slide on that too. It's to be expected. It doesn't mean you're failing. It's just part of the deal. And foster parents, a lot of them adopt their foster, pet. So you lose them right there. And you just have to expect it, thank them for their work, and thank you for saving the life that you fostered, and then move on to trying to recruit the next one that's going to save a life. So we have, this is the total number of animals that entered foster homes per year. And you can see in 2012 that it's a massive number of fosters. And again, the only way that can be maintained is through turnover of the animal going through the foster homes quickly. And if you look at, so that's the total number of animals. That includes foster moves. That's a huge component of the foster coordination team, is when a foster says, oh, this puppy's driving me crazy. I really can't deal with it anymore. Where do I drop it off? Then that foster team has to find another foster to take the animal. And that again, it's just part of the deal. A lot of people want to quit when that starts happening, but it's just part of the deal. We don't really care as long as that animal has a safe place to be. It's okay if it's in 3 homes over the 2 weeks before it gets an adoption. It doesn't matter. And then this is the unique animals in foster. So you can see that it's 1,000 less. There's probably 25 to 30% of the animals in foster get moved at some point. Our foster numbers in 2008, you can see actually the point of this slide is just to show that the breakdown hasn't changed very much. People want babies. And so the majority of the animals in foster are babies. And that's the lowest hanging fruit, which we'll talk about in a second. Actually, I think it might be the next slide. Yep. Puppies. So people want puppies, and people want to foster puppies. And we're euthanizing puppies. So save them, put them in foster homes, let people have them. And we didn't know that we'd be able to conquer that category very quickly, but it turned out that we started in June of 2008, and by November, because we saved our first parvo puppies, we were like, okay, well, we have a parvo home now, which was mine, and why don't we just commit to saving them all? And so we quietly did that. I don't think you need to quietly do it. I think it would actually be better if you loudly make a commitment to saving all the puppies, because then you can get a lot more support, funding, volunteers, and fosters. But we were able to actually pull it off the minute we decided to do it, because there were not that many puppies compared to the rest of the group that were being euthanized. And this is the most desirable group that is being euthanized. They're dying because there's not enough space. If they had their 3 days, a lot of shelters, when they're still at a very high euthanasia rate, the turnover happens after their 3-day stray hold. And it doesn't matter if you're the most adorable little puppy that's ever lived. If your 3 days is up, it's up. And so some of these were very healthy and had zero problems, super cute, just were in a litter of 10 others that were also super cute. Half of them get adopted, half don't. What do you do with them? They also were dying, obviously, because of problems, because they're very susceptible to disease and they're fragile. So parvo, mange, ringworm, diarrhea, broken bones, being too little, and also a big fear is that they'll contract disease while they're at the shelter. And so one of the motivations for euthanizing is to prevent an illness outbreak. And so not keeping a lot of puppies around for a long time is a motivator. And it makes sense because puppies are very fragile. So the strategies are as many foster homes as possible. Get them out of the shelter. Push them out. And again, people want them. We didn't get 100% saved in the first summer, but we did in the second summer. And disease treatment plans. And again, looking at the euthanasia list, we didn't have to put 100% of the puppies that came into the shelter into our foster program. Only the ones that weren't going to make it out alive. So that's a small fraction of the ones that came into the shelter because, again, they're the most desirable, so they're getting out through other means. Creating disease treatment plans for whatever is their problem, creating it and sending them to foster with it, sending them to their adopters with it. We had some speakers yesterday talking about that, and I think that that's really important because there's no reason that we have to hold on to these animals because they need to heal in our care. There's people out there that are perfectly capable of doing it themselves. So empower your fosters, empower your adopters, let them do it. That creates a bond. Why bond with a foster? Why have a puppy that has a broken leg bond with a foster through the healing process when it's most marketable with that broken leg right when the broken leg happens? Get them into an adoption home, let the adopter be the foster, and they bond with the animal instead. And then your foster, who wouldn't, of course all the fosters want to foster the ones that have broken legs too, but you can redirect them to one that maybe there's not a line of people wanting to adopt and waiting. Parvo ward, we'll talk about later, and then, just foster. The contagious disease, these are the challenges everybody knows. Hard to find foster for contagious diseases, hard to keep in the shelter if they contract a contagious disease, and then keeping them healthy from contagious disease is difficult. And then one challenge that we faced early on that's no longer a challenge for us for some reason was that fosters would hold on to them and not turn their cage space over, and so the animal would grow up in foster, and then by the time it got to an adoption event, it was 6 months old and not as cute as it used to be. And this last slide, I put these little puppies up there because this stage of puppy, even though they've got massive Demodex, and we call them chupacabras in Austin, they are still more adoptable than a 4-month, fully haired pit bull mix. So get them out when they're little. And even if they have a problem, send them home with medicine. You can be their vet for that one specific problem. It's not that hard. We have not had a high irritation level with adopters that adopt these animals. They come in for their Promeris, they pick it up after 30 days, and then we send them home with information on how to get it so they can keep doing it at home. Puppy challenges, puppy stats. So in November of 2008, we decided to rescue all of the puppies, and we were successful. Now, once we pull them out, they don't all survive because they've got some of them have problems. Parvo, we have an 85% survival rate. We have mange is 100% as long as there's not another problem. Ringworm, 100%. Fractures, 100%. We haven't had any puppies die of fractures, which I think is really interesting because there's so many that come in hit by cars. We take everything that's still alive If the shelter says, we just got this dog hit by a car, we take it. And we have had a 100% success rate with the puppies, which is, again, kind of amazing. And I think that speaks more to their ability to heal than us being amazing. And distemper is a big question mark, which we'll talk about later. So 4,700 puppies since 2008. Okay, so the next group of animals that are the lowest hanging fruit are small breed dogs. People want small breed dogs, even the Chihuahuas. And they do. It's amazing, but they do. And because we used to call Chihuahuas the small pit bulls of the world. And it's hard to adopt out both groups, but comparatively speaking, they're nowhere near each other. Chihuahuas are, people do want them. And people want pit bulls too. It's just a little bit harder to get the right person in the door. Okay, so the definition of small breed dog to us was 25 pounds at an adult weight that's normal. So if we got an extremely emaciated pit bull in the door that weighed 25 pounds, that doesn't count as a small breed dog. So, because we got some of those. I'm sure everybody's seen those. And they're generally dying because they run out of time, just like the puppies. They are terrified in the shelter environment. They are one-person dogs, and so when they go to the shelter, they are freaked out. There's people grabbing them, all sorts of strangers. There's big dogs barking. If you think about the typical little dog, they don't even spend 10 minutes outside a day, and then all of a sudden they're in a shelter. And, of course, they're terrible patients, so they get labeled aggressive very quickly and then fast-tracked to euthanasia. So small breed strategies. Foster homes, again, foster. One of the strategies that one of our rescue workers came up with that I think was just brilliant was a hold and release technique. And what she would do is literally put on oven mitts and go grab these little dogs and just hold on to them, put them up against her body, and just hold them. Not talk to them, not pet them, not interact with them in any way, shape, or form, and just wait for them to sigh and lick their lips. And it would generally take 5 to 10 minutes, and they would just be stiff and sitting there, and then all of a sudden they would sigh and lick their lips. And she would put them down, not talk to them, don't pet them, don't do anything, just put them down, back out of the cage, and leave. And over 90% of these guys that were aggressive and unhandleable, the next day when she showed up, these dogs would see her from across the courtyard and just go crazy and just jumping up the front of the cage, come over here, come over here, come over here. And so what makes sense. These dogs bond with one person. They need somebody to bond with. And in that environment, the bond happens really quickly. And that was good because we were worried that some of these dogs were actually really aggressive, and we've come across less than 5 that actually have something wrong with their brain, that they're human aggressive. But the rest of them are just terrified, and they're little jerks. And, we all know that as vets. That's normal, but people love them. And the other thing about small breed dogs and puppies is their fractures heal very fast. They're not the large dogs that have weight problems that... So bone fractures can be taken a little bit less seriously. We'll talk about triaging bone fractures, but you don't have to go to these elaborate surgeries for these small breed dogs as long as you're upfront about your communication about what you're doing and also trying to create good 4 legs that are pain-free for the rest of their lives, or 3. And then foster, these are just strategies to get them adopted. Some of these dogs won't bond. They don't bond with anybody in the shelter except for that one person. Same thing happens in a foster home. So they go to a foster home, and the foster has adopters come over to their house, and the dogs are trying to bite the new people that want to adopt them. And so one of our strategies is just to pack up their bags and send them to the adopter's house for a sleepover. And then they're, 30 minutes later, they're bonding with the adopter, and the foster's nowhere to be found. Small breed stats, we've been able to save over 1,800 in the last 3 years. And so that's a chunk that's digestible. That's not a huge number of the 14,000 animals that were being euthanized. And so that's a really good attainable goal, is to save every small breed dog. And 95% save rate overall. A lot of small breed dogs are turned into the shelter for humane euthanasia when they're extremely old and are ready to be euthanized. Okay, so kittens are the next group. There's 3 groups of kittens that are savable. Bottle babies, less than 4 to 6 weeks of age. Gruel babies, 6 to 8 weeks of age. And kittens, 8 to 12 weeks of age. Ringworm complicates everything, as you know. Kitten Strategies, our foster homes, again, send them to foster, trying to find as many fosters as possible. In Austin, I'm sure it's the same in Florida, kittens, there's so many kittens. Of that 14,000 animals that were euthanized in 2007, 9,500 of them were kittens and cats. And so it's a huge problem. We created a bottle baby program to handle mass feedings, which we'll talk about at a later session. And the strategy for cats and kittens that are adoptable age is to just push them back out to the community. So it's recycling, and we'll talk about that, I think it's maybe the next couple slides. We've been able to save over 4,000 bottle babies, 2,500 kittens, and 2,400 teenagers. So cats, again, dying because so many come in the door seasonally. They all hit in the summer. The good thing about adult cats is you can put them in a foster home and you don't care if they become delinquent because it's actually better if they just hold on to them for a few months and then they show up in November and want to place the cat because we don't have any cats then. So it's great. And cats are easy. They fit into a foster home, and people often do try to keep them longer because it's harder to get to adoption events or whatever. And for cats, we just don't care. That's okay. If the foster wants to hold on to them longer, that's fine. For kittens, it's a little different because they have a window of opportunity to get adopted when they're adorable. So our strategies, recycling, getting them back out. So our city is about 800,000 people, and we have one shelter. It used to be in the middle of town when we first got started, but the entire community was bringing all those animals to one spot. So we know people don't go out of their way to adopt cats. We know that. They can find cats on any street corner. If they're in the market to adopt a cat, the first cat they see is probably the one they're going to adopt. So they don't have to go to too much effort to go find a cat. So we tried to be that default position. We tried to be everywhere with cats. And by compartmentalizing the work, they're not all in one building. We spread them out over every PetSmart, every Petco that didn't already have a group in it. We did events on the weekends where we bring cats out in front of those stores. We set up at fairs. We did online marketing, anything that we could think of to get malls. I think there's a picture of one in the mall. And you can generally find volunteers to run cat adoption events. So again, using your resources wisely, trying to get the community engaged. It doesn't have to be a staff person that does all of this work. Open adoptions, I know that's a controversial subject, but we microchip all of our animals. We have a no exceptions return policy. We always take them back. And we're pretty open. So what that means is that we talk to people. If they put the wrong answer on our application, then we talk them through it. And we try to see, is this a real issue or is this just an ignorance issue? And most of the time it's ignorance of what we think is a really important issue for cats. So it might be that they're going to adopt a 6-week-old or 8-week-old kitten and put it outside and they want it to be an outside cat. So we talk to them about it. We're like, no, that's not going to work. It's going to get eaten. They don't understand that. They're too little. And people generally, once you give them the information, they're generally able to digest it and make a good decision. And if the decision is not to adopt because they're not ready, or maybe you should adopt this adult cat that's already lived outside, you can direct people in a way that you still get an adoption and the live outcome out of them, but you don't put the animal at risk. So these hard screening tactics that we in the animal welfare world have used for so long, which is natural. I think it's human nature. We all do it. I've done it. I have a foster animal, and I put them through the ringer to get them adopted, but our policy is not to. And so it's a hard balance. But I think that statistically what we're seeing is people care about the pets. If they're going out of their way to adopt an animal, that means they actually care, and they want to do the right thing for that animal. Cat strategies, the other things that really work is asking people to ping their own network. So that's a network that we don't even have access to. It's not in our email list. It's not on our Facebook. These people, every single person that has an animal in their foster care, they have the ability to send one email out with a cute picture that says, I've got adorable kittens that need a home. And so that goes out to all of their friends. And more often than not, those animals get adopted through their own network, which again makes them feel better because they are responsible and they know these people. Ringworm cats, we have, that's a huge problem in Austin. We all know why it's a huge problem. We treat it with itraconazole. For the first year, we had a volunteer that donated all the itraconazole. She'd go pay in cash at the pharmacy so her husband wouldn't know what she was buying. And it's awesome, our ringworm angel. And we started checking ALTs after we had some cats with high liver values. They showed up with liver disease. We didn't check it preemptively. So now if we have to refill it at the 3-week mark, we check an ALT just to make sure that they're okay with it. Because the stress of being at the shelter, being through the whole process of being in the shelter, spayed, neutered, all of that makes it hard for them to metabolize drugs, I think anyway. Lime sulfur dips twice a week, and then the black light. We don't do culturing yet. That's something that we want to do, but again, we're very resource limited and time limited, and so we basically anything that has hair loss that's a cat is ringworm, and there's exceptions obviously, but the default is if it's hair loss, we treat it as if it's ringworm so that we don't accidentally give somebody a cat with ringworm. We have some strategies to deal with it. If they're in a foster or they're in the we have a ringworm ward for them that's totally run by volunteers. And the cattery entrance checklist, they go to the vet clinic before they can be in the adoption areas. They have to go through a black light. They have to be checked from head to tail. They are, we just make sure that they've gone through a full course of the treatment, kind of just making sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's before we put them in the adoption area. And then they go into a cage, not a habitat, for the first week, just to make sure, again, that the stress doesn't cause a relapse in the ringworm. We've had some adoption events. Adopt a Fun Guy was our favorite one, and it worked. They get adopted, surprisingly, and there's 2 reasons why they get adopted. One is they're cheaper than normal cats, so we send them home with the medicine. Even though it costs us more money to pay for the medicine than we're getting back in an adoption fee, we still send them out with the medicine, and we do the recheck. So they don't have to go to their private vet and spend a fortune. Just like we were talking about yesterday, is that these shelter diseases kind of freak out the private practice vets. And so anything we can do to minimize drama is a good thing. And so we take responsibility for the ringworm. We'll treat it until it's gone. And it doesn't turn into a huge issue with lots and lots of complaining and doctor visits from these people. Most people are pretty self-sufficient as long as you give them the information and you give them the medicine to get the job done. We also display them. So one is they're cheaper than regular cats, and 2, they're out in the open. They are accessible to the public. And we found that out. We knew that because we would do adoption events and they would get adopted. But what we found it kind of by accident that when we moved into the old city shelter, there were 2 cat buildings, and one was for strays and one was for adoption. So we moved our adoption cats into the adoption one, and we moved ringworm into the stray. Both of these were open to the public. And so the public would mill around. We'd have signs everywhere. But since they were accessible and viewable and cheaper, those cats got adopted faster than the other ones, especially in the winter. So we were shocked. The first month we adopted 17 ringworm cats out, and we were like, what is going on? But it's amazing. Fat cat anorexia, we take the cats after their 3-day stray hold from the shelter. We're not taking cats from the public. So a lot of these cats... if they come in fat, it may not be noticed that they haven't been eating, or they may stop eating after the second move from the shelter to us. So we put them kind of on high alert and make sure they're weighed daily, make sure that we have them in an individual cage or in a foster home so they can be observed and not fall through the cracks. Like if they were in a habitat and everybody's eating out of one dish, we wouldn't necessarily notice that they're not eating until it's too late. And then force feeding, if they've got upper respiratory, which a lot of them do, force feeding. You can prevent liver failure with just tons and tons of force feeding. And our fosters got really good at force feeding. And we did place a lot of E-tubes, too, for the ones that refuse to be force-fed. We started a feral barn cat program. The Austin Humane Society has a TNR program, and so they take the cats that come into the shelter, to the city shelter that are in a trap, and they release them back where they came from. So they do the Feral Freedom project mostly. The piece that was missing were the cats that came in where the person said, I do not under any circumstances want this cat back, and if it comes back, I'm going to hurt it. So those cats would fall through the cracks because they would be not TNR-able, and they're not handleable necessarily. So what do you do with them? They were one of the last pieces to saving all the cats. And we have a volunteer who does barn cat placement for us, and she has this amazing network ability to work through horse vets, feed barns, places where people go that have barns and property. And she's able to place about 30 a month, and it turns out that's all we needed. And so we're able to save every single cat that's feral that can't get TNR'd. And she does a whole process of interviewing them. It's an adoption, and she takes the cats herself out there and sets them up in their little acclimation building that she's built. I mean, she's amazing. So this is the actual last piece of no-kill, is the feline leukemia cats. These are the hardest to save. It's the wisest choice not to save them if anything else is out there that is savable. And so there's some things that we learned with feline leukemia over time. One is that one thing I didn't know, even though it is written in the IDEX SNAP test, is that if you get a positive, you should test with serum, because the red blood cells interact with the test on a certain percentage of cats and cause a false positive. So cats that are deemed positive and only on a whole blood test may actually be negative. So doing the serum test is vital. The kittens, the other thing we found out is that kittens often seroconvert to negative. So we get a positive test, we take kittens of all ages, and almost all of our kittens become negative over time. We have a few litters that don't, but for the most part, and I don't know the statistics, I'd love to compile them, but it's definitely over 50% become negative. So putting them into foster, isolating them in some way so that they can just deal with the disease on their own time. Getting out of the shelter is good because they have less stress. We don't spay them while we're waiting to see if they can become negative. We just make sure that they've got rest and TLC and no stress, and then we retest them in 3 to 4 weeks after the initial test with serum. And for the ones that truly are positive, we don't do a lot of confirmation at the lab. We do the IDEX testing, and if somebody wants to adopt them and to confirm, then we can do more expensive testing, but we just don't have the funds to send out the IFA test on everybody. They generally, what we've seen for the ones that are testing consecutively, testing positive on their serum tests, that they live 6 months to 2 years. We've created a ward for them, for the ones that can't find foster. They do get adopted. We have about 2 a month that get adopted that are feline leukemia positive. And we market them as short-term commitments. You know, if somebody's in Austin for 2 years, this is the perfect cat for you, because we'll take care of any medical that comes up that's related to feline leukemia. So recurrent infections is pretty much it. We tell them up front, we're not doing blood work, we're not doing blood transfusions, we're not doing any heroic measures, but if this cat can live a healthy life for the next year or two and you're willing to take it into your home, we'll help you. If it gets run over by a car, we're not doing that. That's your fault. It needs to go to a regular vet. But if it's related to feline leukemia, we deal with it. And again, it's not turned into a burden. It's very few visits. We're really upfront about the amount of work that we're willing to do. Big dogs. Okay, so big dogs are the last piece for dogs. Big dogs with behavior problems are really the last piece for dogs. And that's because it's a chronic problem. Big dogs with behavior problems, that's something that has to be worked on for their entire lives generally. And so finding a committed adopter for these dogs is difficult. I would put a portion of these dogs in that last 10% that is very, very difficult to save. We have several programs that we created to try to deal with them. One is a walking program, so we have volunteers come at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. to walk the dogs just to get them out of their kennels, help with house training, a little bit of stimulation. We have a jog-a-dog program that is with a jogging group in town, a running group, and they recruit and train volunteers to come rent our dogs and take them out for a jog around the track that's near our building. Playgroup therapy, if anybody has a chance to check out Amy Sadler and what she's done at the Longmont Humane Society, we recruited one of her people to come work with us, and now we do playgroup every day. And almost every dog that we had labeled as dog aggressive is now doing playgroups because we were just wrong. The testing that we do on a leash to test whether they're dog aggressive is a fallible test because there's so many things that go into it. But when you have the play groups and you have somebody who can do them right, the dogs can be themselves, and then you can see what their true interaction is with dogs. And 9 times out of 10, the dogs that we thought that were labeled aggressive, we pulled them, and we found out later that they were aggressive because of a fight on a leash, or dogs getting loose in the courtyard and fighting, or they were labeled at the shelter as dog aggressive, and we were like, well, we're not sure. When we got him on board to come do the trainings with us and do playgroup, and I had a video, but I can't play it for some reason, but the length of stay has dropped. We used to have 65 days for big dogs with behavior problems, and now we're down to 52 days. So that's awesome. He's only been with us for 2 months. And we created a Big Brother, Big Sister program where we try to encourage volunteers to pick one dog, again, compartmentalizing the work, pick one dog and really baby it, take it on walks, take it out to the public, and help it to just stay sane while it's with us. And then we did a big dog crisis of 2012 where we split up our kennels, compartmentalizing the work again. It's all about making it digestible. And we now have 150 kennels at the shelter that we have. And so people are overwhelmed. They come in, adopters are overwhelmed, fosters are overwhelmed, volunteers are overwhelmed. And so we created what we're calling the Wingman Project, and we have wings of the shelter that volunteers are taking on, and they're doing cage signage, they're doing marketing for those dogs specifically. They're coming and walking those dogs specifically. They're bringing those dogs treats. They're doing things for those. It's easier when there's only 20 as opposed to 150. So we tried to just make it something that's digestible. And then the wings are competing against each other for adoptions, which is great. Okay, so severe generalized Demodex, we take all of them, no matter how bad it is, and we have a 100% success rate with this. We do treat with Primaris. We've had a few reactions to Primaris, but the vast majority do great on it. And the reactions aren't near as bad as what I had read about. They do great with anti-inflammatories, and their swelling goes down after a couple days. And then we also make sure that they're parasite-free on the inside, and we'll adopt him out. Again, he is much more adoptable with no hair than he would be in 3 months with all his hair. Fractures. So this is sort of our triage for fractures, and we try to kind of do it old school because we don't have, the reason we can take every single broken dog is that we don't have the resources to send every single one out for surgery. We just can't. So this goes back to my 1 year in Rocky Mount, Virginia, where we didn't really have very many resources at all. And we've developed criteria of what we send to surgery and what we don't send to surgery. And we don't send long bone fractures to surgery, no matter how awful they are. There's a saying that if the bones are in the same room, they'll find each other and make a callus. And it's kind of true, as long as you immobilize them. So the long bones, we don't do any repair. Pelvises, we don't repair unless the acetabulum is fractured. And in that case, we wait 6 weeks for the dog to heal because we're not doing a lot of x-rays. We're not doing a lot of internal diagnostics. We don't know what else is broken in there soft tissue-wise. So putting them through surgery immediately after their accident doesn't seem, if you're doing a salvage procedure, doesn't seem like the best choice for us. So they go to foster, we reevaluate and at 6 weeks, and then send them for their FHO. We do surgery if it's a joint, and especially if it's a big dog with a joint, because we don't want them to have chronic pain for the rest of their life. We're trying to give them a happy life. And they may not have the most perfect looking leg, but as long as it's pain-free, then that's all we care about. If the splint or the sling doesn't work, the dog keeps getting out of it, they keep refracturing the callus, then, okay, the long bone is going to end up going to surgery. If it's a huge dog, recently we had a 140-pound dog that had a fractured humerus, and we just felt like there was no other option but to send him to surgery. And the smaller dogs do great with that, and cats and puppies. And, of course, you can't not do pain management and immobilization. So you can't just leave the fracture and do nothing. It has to be taken care of appropriately, even if you're not doing surgery. Okay, so triage, somebody called it scarce resource management, and I think that's a really great way of looking at trying to save these animals because it's not the same as a private practice where people are willing to pay the bill or an established shelter where you've got more funds for each animal that comes in the door. We have to conserve every dollar we get and try to put it to its best use while trying to save everything. So our doctors have to be flexible with their drug choices. We get a ton of drugs donated, and they're all spectrums and every type of use, and we try really hard to use everything that we get. And that decreases our cost, our medical costs. Our medical costs are by far our largest cost for the whole Austin Pets Alive program. And if we can decrease that in any way, especially in the summer crunch, we put out an APB spending freeze. Got to start looking through all the donations. And everybody hates it, but they generally find what they're looking for. There's exceptions to the rule, obviously. Following protocols for efficiency, Just like we heard yesterday, if you can have something that is protocol, we call them recipes. If you have that set and written down where everybody can find it, then everybody can move faster through the process for 99% of the animals. And we only, again, just like with fractures, only the worst conditions that have the highest likelihood of chronic pain later in life are the ones that end up going to a specialist or getting blood work or getting surgery. Heartworm treatment, this is pretty simple. I'm just going to, how much time? I don't see a clock anywhere. So our non-medical programs to save other pets, we have a positive alternative to shelter surrender, which is on the next slide also, and then our reclaim and adopt from our city. And I think I have another slide about that. So prevention at the front gates. Our past program is somebody who used to sit outside in front of the shelter, and as people walked in, talk to them about why they've got their pet there, what is going on, why are they having to leave it, and they do it in a very nurturing, counseling way. It's not accusatory, it's not how dare you, it's just information. Okay, what have you tried already? What have you tried rehoming this pet on your own? Have you asked family? Have you, kind of go through the questions. And they spend a lot of time talking to people. They get about 10 to 20% of people to turn around and leave with the pet in a positive way. And we do marketing for those pets to help rehome them by helping to create Facebook pages and our Facebook ads and Craigslist ads and help screen adopters for the person so that the animal doesn't have to go into the shelter. And we were initially focused on the high-risk animals that had the highest risk of being euthanized, but as we'll talk about in the distemper study, or distemper program, there was a distemper outbreak. So even the most adorable dog that came into our shelter was at risk for getting a disease that would make it not leave the shelter alive. So helping people not drop their pet off is an amazing use of resources. And there was information yesterday about counseling and having staff do the appointment only. I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think it's something every shelter should try because it really, really helps. And most people just don't realize it. They don't realize that if they drop their pet off, it might be euthanized. They don't even think that it could possibly be the one they're dropping off. Even if you say 8 out of 10, they're like, well, but not this one. It's just, well. So adoptions, we do positive messaging. We try to have healthy, happy animals. If they're not healthy, we tell them what's going on and why they're there. We do send out Demodex and Ringworm puppies to adoption events. And consistency is important, great customer service, open adoptions. I'm just going to quickly go through this because we're almost out of time. These are off-site adoptions I think are critical. Again, recycling animals, putting them back into the community so that people have a chance to see them. Not everybody wants to come to the shelter, so make it easy for them to find their soulmate. Online adoptions, this is really important because people do everything on the internet now, everything. And I know there's a stigma for putting animals out there on the internet, but you think about the major life decisions that people make on the internet. They find their partner, they get vehicles, they go on vacation, they buy homes. They do things on the internet that we used to not do. And so finding a pet they should be on the internet. Your pets should be on the internet. And one of the cornerstone pieces of online adoptions is that you have to have somebody to answer the call. If somebody sees one of your pets on the internet, they need to be directed somewhere quickly because most of these people don't have a lot of patience and they're going to fall. It's not that hard to create a bond between a person and an animal. So the first one they come into contact with that even remotely likes them is probably the one that's going to get adopted. So if yours can be the first one that meets these people who are interested, you have a higher likelihood of being the one that gets adopted. We also try to tell people when they go meet pets that there's a high chance that they'll see some behaviors that make them look less adoptable. One of them with adult dogs, the longer that we have an adult dog, the more likely they are to ignore people, strangers who come up to them at events and at our building. And we try to tell people before they go, the dog's probably going to ignore you. It doesn't mean that he doesn't like you. You just need to get him out of the cage and take him somewhere quiet and try to spend about 30 minutes with him. Bring some treats, just try to engage. And that helps because people think, oh, well, we just didn't connect. And that's not the case at all. The poor dog's just seen 50 people in the last 2 weeks, and they're tired of connecting at the first instant. Small breed dogs expect to be ignored and maybe bitten illnesses. And, if they've got a problem, we tell people up front, we will adopt out anything with any problem. It doesn't matter what the problem is. We don't, again, an adopter is no different than a foster home. So if we trust a foster to take care of an animal, there's no reason why we wouldn't trust an adopter to take care of an animal. And that helps us with turnover. And then all of our online adoptions get channeled to our adoption site, so a counselor can go over the paperwork and the process of adoption and just make sure that it's all good. Adoptions, this was Reclaim and that other slide had. And we had, when we were first involved with our city, we had volunteers that would post animals that we knew we couldn't take and try to get them out that way. So just trying to get the general public to get engaged and come down and look at these animals. We would also call the person who dropped them off. And that's kind of controversial, but for the most part, people don't mind. There's a few people who really mind, but most part, people don't mind because they didn't expect that pet to get euthanized, so they want to be given the last right of refusal so that they can come and foster it if need be or think of another solution. So we call them if we know the pet's not going to make it. We don't call them until that point. Our facility, adoptions at an adoption facility, we're not reliant on people just walking by that might happen to like pets and stop and pet them. Everybody who walks into an adoption facility has an intention of adopting. So we should think about them like that we're not, this isn't a sell. All we have to do is do good customer service, ask them what they're looking for, point them to a few animals that might fit the description, and the process should work. But it does take customer service. If you're, and our shelter is just as guilty as anybody else, it's easy to ignore the person that walks in the door, and they can self-serve, they can look at all the dogs and cats. But if you can provide that customer service and help them find that bond with that right animal, then they are more likely to leave with one. Our challenges with adoption is, giving access to these animals. We're taking the bottom 50%, so some of them have unknown behaviors, some of them have known behaviors, some of them have known diseases or unknown diseases, and there is some liability to that. It's not overwhelming. I think that we've probably made every mistake that could possibly be made, and we're still here. And so I don't think liability is a good reason not to try to get animals adopted. And then getting them out of foster, I said earlier, is kind of a challenge. Our statistics, we've moved from a 50% save rate to over 90% since, and we've been at 90% consistently since 2011, February. And we, again, going back to those measurable results, we know for a fact that 45% of the decrease in euthanasia was because of us. Not the jump from 50% to 95% save rate, but the decrease in the 50% euthanasia. We were responsible for almost half of that, which means the city ponied up the rest of it. They actually increased their adoptions. They did the positive energy that came into this project from a city level resulted in positive results across the city. The Humane Society had higher adoptions. The city had higher adoptions. We had higher adoptions. Everybody did. And you can, in Austin, you can barely find any purebred dogs walking around, which is really astounding. And this is just a chart of kind of our growth. It's been kind of exponential. And that's it. Any questions?